Let's see here, 9.3x62, 9.3x74R. What? Let's go to Nosler and see what they've got. 9.3x62 Mauser and 375 H&H. Confident with Hornady, they have just about every cartridge in their book. 9.3x62 and 376 Steyr. Well, apparently us Americans have something against the 9.3x64 Brenneke. Today's video, that's what we're going to cover. We are going to talk about one of the most underrated, one of the best, most efficient, dangerous game cartridges from Europe. Say what you will about the Germans and their culture and their politics, but man, do they know how to make rifles, cartridges, and automobiles. And the 9.3x64 Brenneke is no exception. In fact, I really do believe it's one of the most underrated dangerous game cartridges there is. In the early 20th century, African hunting had just blown up and become extremely popular with the Europeans, specifically the British and, the Germans and a bunch of other of the Europeans. Brenneke, in 1927, came up with the 9.3x64. And his design was way ahead of its time for 1927. So, with this case, it is able to fit in a Mauser 98 action. It is not a Magnum, but provides almost 375 H&H performance. In fact, this cartridge might be the first rebated rim cartridge. Now, for us uneducated North Americans that think in inches, a 9.3mm is a .366, so it is just a little bit bigger than the 35 calibers and just a little bit smaller than any of the 375 calibers. Another thing to note, that Brenneke did not use another cartridge to make the 9.3x64. This is an original design that has no parent case, which is pretty unique. I do think with it being a rebated rim that the 284 Winchester maybe got inspiration from the 9.3x64. It's really interesting that a rebated rim was created so long ago. I could be wrong, but it is probably one of the first, if it is not the first. So it has the same case head as an 8mm or 7mm Mauser or 30-06 case. However, the case is a little bit bigger, so that's how it has the performance that it does. Let's go ahead now and look at the performance. A 250 grain at 2,800 feet per second. And then a 286 grain bullet, where it's a solid or a partition, you're looking almost 2,700 feet per second. And when you look at the energy, which I will show in a second, you're looking at 4,300 foot-pounds of energy. In a case that is much smaller than a 375 H&H or any of the other Magnums, it really is incredible performance. Now, as tradition, let's just see how it does out at distance. Now, of course, this cartridge wasn't really made for Western long-range hunting by any means, but we're still going to look at it just to see how it stacks up to North American cartridges. And we're going to use a 250 grain AccuBond with a BC of .494 and top velocity of 2,800 feet per second. That energy is a lot. That is a little more than a 300 Weatherby Magnum. And out to 400 yards, look at that. It's enough velocity to expand, 2107. And your energy is plenty enough, 2465 foot-pounds. And then your drop, 29.27 inches. So where does that put it? Well, it has about the exact same drop as a 6.5 Creedmoor or a fast-shooting 308 Winchester. So the drop's actually pretty darn good. Now I want to compare the 9.3x64 Brenneke to the North American equivalent or even the British standard in the 375 H&H. First up, let's go ahead and look at the 35 Whelen. We're going to load these for dangerous game. Yes, I know 35 calibers, a medium bore cartridge, and In a lot of countries, it's not legal to hunt with the 35 Whelen with dangerous game, but we're just going to look at this hypothetical. A 250 grain at 2650 feet per second, your energy almost 3,900 foot-pounds, which is right there with a 300 Win Mag. Really awesome cartridge, 35 Whelen. And since we are looking at this as towards dangerous game, I don't see people taking a shot more than 100 yards, so let's just take it out to 100. 2453 feet per second, 3342 foot-pounds of energy. Next up, the standard, the 375 H&H. We're going to use a 260 grain bullet at 2800 feet per second. Your energy, 4527 foot-pounds. At 100 yards, 2,608 feet per second, 3,928 foot-pounds. The 9.3x64 Brenneke, a 250 grain at 2,800 feet per second. Your energy, 4,353 foot-pounds. So you're really getting close to 375 H&H performance with a much smaller case. And at 100 yards, 2616 feet per second and 3,800 foot-pounds of energy. Now, we are going to step it up a lot. So this is not exactly apples to apples, but whatever. A 416 Rem Mag, 400 grain, 2,500 feet per second. Your energy, 5,552 foot-pounds. At 100 yards, 2283. Then you have 4,630 foot-pounds of energy. Yeah, the 416 Rem Mag is an incredible dangerous game cartridge. And of course, I am reloading Weatherby, so of course we're going to include the 416 Weatherby Magnum. In the 416 Weatherby Magnum, we are using factory ammo. So I've got to imagine you can get a bit more when you hand load. 2,700 feet per second. Your energy is an incredible 6,474 foot-pounds. At 100 yards, bullets going 25 feet per second. And you have 5,221 pounds of energy out of the 416 Weatherby Magnum. The 9.3x64 Brenneke is an impressive cartridge. In fact, I would probably say it's probably the most impressive German cartridge. And I know there is some great heritage with German cartridges. Obviously, the 7mm Mauser and the 8mm Mauser are the grandfathers of basically all cartridges. But I think the 9.3x64 is just so impressive. Now in front of me is a 338 Winchester Magnum, and the 9.3x64 is a little bit more powerful than the 338 Win Mag, and it has a smaller case with no belt. It is so impressive just how ahead of its time it was in 1927. Whenever I watch videos about African cartridges, the 9.3x64 is always mentioned, and the Germans and the Europeans are always gushing about the 9.3x64. And you know what? They have good reason to.